Hello, beautiful people, and, and welcome to the Genshin Impact 6.1 Phase 2 banner review. Arlecchino is getting a rerun. Zhongli is getting a rerun. Oh boy. They're running alongside Rosaria, Yunjin, and Lan Yan. So let's talk about them. First, let's get Zhongli out of the way. Zhongli is not a good character. Even if what you care about is gameplay, there are still different types of gameplay upsides and downsides that appeal to different types of players. Zhongli, effectively, he tends to make things easier to execute. He has a long uptime, not too long cooldown shield that is fairly strong. And offensively, he doesn't tend to be that useful, so that's pretty much it. There are a lot of players for whom this is useful. I think the biggest problem, though, is that, well, this isn't 2023 or 2024 anymore, and we now have other good shielders. Zhongli is not the only shielder that isn't Diona or Xinyan anymore. Nowadays, Inefa exists. Lan Yan exists. Lan Yan is on this banner, and it makes a character like Zhongli, whose pretty much only purpose is shielding, not really that valuable, because his only purpose is shielding, but he's not even always the best at it. And even if he is it worth going for a character just for that? Zhongli is really not that good anymore. I mean, he was never like insane, but it used to be that Zhongli was a fairly good character for people that wanted defensive utility more than DPS. I'd say nowadays that's just not really the case anymore, and I just don't think that pulling for Zhongli is a good idea. Now, we are getting witch character buffs for a lot of the Mondstadt characters. I think it's very possible that we end up getting character buffs for other characters in the future. And if we do, I think it's very likely Zhongli is going to be included in that. But if he is, he'll get a rerun after the buffs. So pulling for him with a speculative mind like that is not a good idea. I'd say that, like, from a meta perspective, there is no one who should go for Zhongli. Even people who want defensive utility, go for another shielder instead. And the other character we have is Arlecchino. Just in terms of DPS, Arlecchino is honestly not that good. That being said, this is assuming that you are always hitting an enemy, you're doing good rotations, the enemy doesn't have any stall phases. When you look at what's currently in Siege and Onslaught, but also what's been in Siege and Onslaught for the past while, you'll notice that there's very often boss mechanics that interfere with your ability to just output DPS. And Arlecchino is one of the characters who bypasses that interference the best. The way that Arlecchino deals her damage is she uses her skill, she gets Bond of Life when she uses the charge attack after letting the skill cook for a few seconds, and then that Bond of Life is consumed to increase her damage. The more Bond of Life she has, the more damage she does. But what that means is that if you're not attacking the enemy, you're not consuming Bond of Life. So if the enemy has some form of stall, the damage that Arlecchino loses isn't the damage when she has high Bond of Life at the start of the rotation, it's the damage when she has a low Bond of Life at the end of her rotation. On top of that, she will finish the rotation with more leftover Bond of Life, which will allow her to start the next rotation with even more. When you just take into account her ability to carry over Bond of Life to the next rotation without looking at stall phases, her DPS is still not that good. But the practical upsides of Arlecchino's ability to benefit effectively from stall phases is actually impactful. To the point where in the current meta, in the current versions of Siege and Onslaught, Arlecchino actually tends to be a fairly good character overall. Now, does that mean she's worth getting? Not necessarily. The biggest issue with Arlecchino is that generally, one, she's not the only character that will be a fairly decent generalist for dealing with a bunch of different types of bosses. And two, bosses that shill her, right now we have a boss that shills her, the Bond of Life Fatui enemy. But once that's gone, we'll probably never again get another Bond of Life shill. And the sort of shills we'll get are likely gonna be Pyro shills. And if there's a boss that shills Pyro, Maoika will be better than Arlecchino. Arlecchino's biggest struggle in terms of keeping up with the meta is that she's a Pyro character in a meta where Maoika exists. And Maoika is just not fair. On top of that, the witch buffs are bringing Klee back and making her a fairly okay character overall. So it makes it pretty difficult for me to say that Arlecchino is a great pull. However, unlike a character like Zhongli, I don't think she's worthless to get. I also think that, as a general rule, there's always going to be people that want to pull for characters they like and care about their meta performance, but care also about the characters they like. And Arlecchino falls in that category where if you do like her, you'll be able to pretty easily clear endgame content with her. She's still a pretty strong character. She's also pretty easy to play. I think a lot of people are intimidated by Arlecchino's inability to heal, right? While you're in combat, healing on Arlecchino is just completely negated, and she can use her burst to consume her bond of life to heal, but that makes you lose your bond of life, so it makes you lose a lot of damage. But honestly, worst case scenario, you just do that, you just use your burst. And I think very often, difficulty isn't just not dying, it's also executing rotations well. And rotations on Arlecchino are really easy. Not only are they really easy, but they don't tend to punish you that much for fucking up. Even when you play her teams that punish you the most for fucking up, which is the melt teams, where fucking up means you start losing melts, unlike a character like Maoika, Arlecchino is only reacting a third of her motion value. Obviously, you melt that, it's multiplied by 2, so it becomes about half, a little bit more if you have EM. But if you lose those reactions, you're only losing like 25-ish% of your damage. Character like Maoika that loses reactions, you're losing over half. Character like Gaming, you're losing like 2/3. And so, you don't tend to get punished too hard for execution errors. She also doesn't really have that big of a gap between her optimal normal attack combos and the suboptimal ones, so it doesn't feel bad to dash to dodge an incoming attack. In practice, when I play Arlecchino, I actually tend to feel like it's easier to play than a lot of other teams. So just when it comes to like her inability to heal, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Does that mean I recommend getting Arlecchino? No, right? At the end of the day, if what you want on your account is a pyro carry, you want Maoika. And if what you want is a second or third team, Arlecchino pales in comparison with characters like Skirt. So honestly, she's just not a character that I think is like really ever optimal to get, but you won't feel too bad about getting her. To me, characters like Arlecchino have the perfect balance, where they are strong enough to clear endgame content, they have some actual upsides over the stronger characters that make them situationally better, but those upsides have enough caveats to them that they're not always better. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Arlecchino. So now let's talk about the 4 stars. There is one good 4-star on this banner, and it's Lan Yan. I've talked about Lan Yan briefly when I talked about Zhongli. Lan Yan's shield is really big. Lan Yan's shield scales with her attack and its snapshot, so if you're playing her with Bennett, her shield is really, really big. But also, because it's an Animo shield, very often you'll be able to use Lan Yan against elemental enemies in order to get yourself a shield of their element. Because there's a lot of enemies that either have their own element on them, like Tulpa, or obviously they hit you with the element they damage you with, so you can self-absorb an aura and use that to absorb an element into Lan Yan's shield and get it to be stronger against that element. As a reminder, shields of a specific element are much more effective against that element. A 10,000 HP shield that is Pyro will prevent 10,000 Geo damage, but it will be able to prevent 25,000 Pyro damage. But on top of being a shielder, Lan Yan is also a Catalyst Animo character, so she can use TTDS and VV. She also has a lot of hits on her skill. With C1, her skill is 4 hits plus 4 infusion hits plus swirls, so it's like 10 hits. So enemies that require a lot of hits, you look at the Pyro Lava Dragon, you look at, in the current Stage of Onslaught, the Hera. There's stuff you can do with Lan Yan, right? You can give her sack, or if you have her C6, you can use that too, and get a lot of hits very quickly. Yeah, just don't use her against the turtle. Exactly. Overall, Lan Yan tends to be a fairly useful character. I think her C2 tends to be bat-chested a little. People see the C2 refreshing 40% of the shield value when you do a normal attack and are like, oh my god, that's so much shielding. But the reality is that you just don't need that much shielding. It's just not necessary. Your shield isn't going to break even without the C2. So don't be baited by the C2. I think her only actual relevant constellations are the C1 and the C6. And honestly, I don't think either of them are that important. C0 Lan Yan works completely fine. Next, we have Rosaria. Rosaria is like holding on for dear life, trying to stay relevant in the meta. Nowadays, you can use Rosaria for crowd application for melt teams, but because of her long animations, and the timing of her attacks, it tends to feel kind of bad to use. Even if it's not bad, it tends to feel bad. She also doesn't have all that long uptime, especially if you don't have her C2. Overall, Rosaria is still used in like low-cost clears, right? Like there's a C0R1 Maoika melt clear of Hera. Or sorry, C0R0, my bad. Dire clear of Hera. But anyways, overall, Rosaria is good to have as like a non-premium option. But she is like outright strictly worse than Citlali in pretty much every situation. So she's the sort of character that is nice to have for people that want to skip Citlali, but if you decide to get Citlali, she will become completely worthless and you'll never play her again, basically. Does that mean that she's bad? No, because like you can just decide that you don't like Citlali, you don't like Citlali. It is what it is. But generally, if you have a pyro carry you like and you want to play in a melt team, if you like them enough to go for them, very often you'll want to get their best team. And if you don't like them enough to go for them, well, you won't go for them. So I think of Rosaria a lot more as a like transition character where you use her just because you don't have Citlali yet on a new account that went from Maoika, basically. Personally, I don't play Rosaria anymore. I play her every once in a while when I do 4-star only clears. When you look at the 4-star characters that tend to be worse than a specific 5-star character in a specific archetype, they usually still have 1 or 2 upsides that give you a reason to use them in some situations. I don't think that's really ever the case for Rosaria. That being said, she does work with Arlecchino if you want to play Arlecchino Melt, although not that well, but it works. So the fact that she's on Arlecchino's banner is kind of nice, I guess. Finally, we have Yunjin. Yunjin is awful. The biggest problem with Yunjin is that the numbers she got are just so awful. They're really, really, really bad. Technically, it is not impossible for Yunjin to be good. Right? The buff provided by Yunjin's burst is flat motion value that scales off of her defense, which means that if you were to make a carry that has low motion values and not a lot of like attacks steroids, but they have like a passive that gives them 300 damage percent and 200 crit damage, right? And they're balanced so that they're not just broken, but like the way that they deal their damage is rather than having high motion value, they have high stats. All right, kind of similar to Hu Tao, who gets a lot of attack from her skill, but has fairly low motion value. All right, obviously Hu Tao nowadays isn't that good, but like back on release, the way that Hu Tao was balanced was, well, her motion value wasn't that good, but her E gives a lot of attack. So it makes her overall output fairly solid. Well, if you made a character like that, but that got a stat that isn't attack, a stat like damage percent or crit, you could make them work well with Yunjin. The problem is, I feel like you would need to give them so many stats for Yunjin to be competitive with other options that I just don't see that happening. With more and more good supports being released, even with the characters that Yunjin works well with, like Yoimiya, for example, well, they're getting better options. She's getting left behind. There is something to be said about Yunjin's buff individually applying to each character on your team. So if you had a character that deals off-field damage that's counted as normal attack damage, you could effectively be buffing 2 characters with Yunjin instead of 1. But honestly, I'm not really expecting too much out of future characters being designed around Yunjin. Overall, character banners, these are some of the worst banners we've had in a while. Like, Arlecchino's not awful to get, but she's not all that appealing either. Lan Yan is fine, but you don't really care about getting more than 1 copy of her. Rosaria's okay. You don't really care about anything past C2, but getting the C2 can be nice. Yunjin is completely awful. Zhongli is not it. Oh boy. And then we have this. This is such a bad weapon banner. Doghand's Assistant is an HP sword. It used to be, ooh, 4-star HP sword for Nilo. Wow. Now that we've have the not cry craftable, like, why would you care? Range gauge is an okay weapon, but it's rarely more than like 1 or 2% better than just a random like stringless or whatever. So like it's not that appealing. Portable power saw isn't good on anyone. Sack frag is nice, but you generally don't need too many copies of it, so it's not too important. Dragon's Bane is only good on like Hu Tao, but at this point in 2025, players who have Hu Tao and don't have a weapon for her yet don't exist. And if you're planning on getting Hu Tao later because you like her, you only care about Dragon's Bane if you aren't a battle pass buyer. I guess it's fine otherwise. The other character that likes Dragon's Bane is Raiden, but you don't need refines on it, so you only need 1 copy. Overall, the 4-star lineup here is awful. And then the 5-star lineup is even worse. Crimson Moon Semblance is pretty solid on Arlecchino, but it's not a good stat stick. It doesn't work well on other characters. And even on Arlecchino, there's going to be some situations where it's not that good. I've talked about Arlecchino's ability to deal with stall phases. Like, the way that Crimson Moon Semblance provides its value is twofold. First way is by just giving stats, and the second way is by directly giving Bond of Life. But if you have enemy mechanics that allow you to effectively start with full Bond of Life, you lose the value from this weapon, because you have full Bond of Life with it or without it. On top of that, Arlecchino is one of the characters that works the best with Jadewing Spear. So for people that got a Jadewing Spear, the upgrade from her SIG isn't that big. And then on top of that, Arlecchino has one of the strongest C1s. So if you're gonna be going for vertical investment on Arlecchino, you're generally better off going for C1. Her weapon isn't bad, but it's really low priority. And then on top of that, Vortex Vanquisher is one of the worst weapons in the game. It's not even good on Zhongli. Zhongli doesn't want Vortex Vanquisher. It is worse than his other weapons by far. Vortex Vanquisher is situationally better than free-to-play options on some polearm carries, but rarely. It's not a good weapon. Like, if you want to build damage Zhongli, get Homa or some shit. I don't fucking know. But, like, not Vortex Vanquisher. And then losing your 50-50 to Crimson Moon Semblance is bad because it's not bad. It's not good on anyone except Arlecchino. And if you care about Arlecchino, losing your 50-50 on Vortex Vanquisher is gonna be the worst feeling in the game. This is a terrible banner with a terrible 5-star and 4-star lineup. This is probably the most strongly I've felt about advising people to skip banners ever. Unless you just really like Arlecchino, weren't playing back on her previous rerun, these banners are just 100% skip. Save your primos, which characters are coming, Columbina's coming, you'll have a better use for them. Anyways, that'll be it for this one. As usual, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.